Greg Shapleigh. You are by far and away the most recommended guest on my podcast that I've ever gotten. So I've talked to, I think, probably at least five or six people that have said you have to get Greg Shapleigh on the podcast. So here we are, really excited to have you. And I guess let's just jump in. I'm gonna let you get into like where you're from, and we'll talk a little bit about your career and your experience and all that fun stuff. So take it away, Greg Shapleigh. Maybe just start talking about maybe where you live, where you're at now, and then we can get into your background, kind of where you're from.
Yeah, all sounds good. Thanks for the introduction and no pressure, as they say.
No,
I find
none.
I find all that a little bit hard to believe, but
It's true.
um, yeah, it's nice to hear. So yeah, my name is Greg Shapleigh. I'm an American, currently living in France. I've been living here on and off for about 12 or 13 years.
What city?
Um, We live in the southwest of France, a little corner of France that many people in Europe know and love, and seems to be kind of a black hole for Americans. We're just north of the Spanish border on the Atlantic coast. So it's a surf town in the mountains,
Oh,
not
wow.
unlike what I think of as my hometown, which is Santa Cruz, California.
Oh, you're from
Um,
Santa Cruz originally. Okay.
well, I'm not. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and we can get into that in a little bit if it's relevant. But I spent more than 30 years in Santa Cruz,
Okay.
so that's really where I feel like I'm from, and the place that has influenced me the most, and where I grew up as a business person.
Whenever I hear Santa Cruz, I always think of the movie The Lost Boys. Always.
Well, yeah, I remember when I first went to Santa Cruz, I had to go look for that bridge and look for the caves and some of the places,
What did they
that
what did they
showed
call it
up
in
in
the
that
movie?
movie.
In the movie they called it San Luis or something. They had a different name. It wasn't Santa Cruz in the movie.
Something like that. And there was
Yeah,
that sign that said it was the murder capital of the country or something like that,
exactly.
which is
Anyway,
really not at all the way Santa
no,
Cruz
I
is.
know.
It's
It's beautiful.
especially when I moved there in 1990, it was just after the big earthquake and it was still the so-called hippie culture was still alive and well there. It's a very countercultural place that seemed to attract people who wanted to live their passion, whatever that was, whether it was skateboarding or surfing or art or poetry or consciousness or bike racing in my case.
So you're from Cincinnati. You grew up in
That's right.
Cincinnati. And where did you study? Where did you go to college, high school and college?
I went to a great high school in Cincinnati that was a bit of a magnet school and was really committed to kind of a classical education. So I took 3 years of Latin, as one example, and it was quite rigorous. And I was quite I wasn't a very committed student, but I think just being in a place that had very high standards around um, many people who were working really hard to further their education. Somehow I absorbed some of that and it created a bit of a foundation.
You
But
know,
I
I don't.
really I discovered, I think, learning when I went to a small liberal arts college in Indiana called DePauw University, spelled DEPAUW, as opposed to DePaul, DEPAUL, which a lot of people know from their basketball program.
Right.
But I
And
went to school there and then eventually made my way out to Santa Cruz.
so I don't think performance in high school is very indicative. I've heard a lot of performance. I think it comes down to level of engagement, the teachers that you have. I always felt like I was reading or I was taking this course and there's like this high functioning lazy concept where it's like if I can just get the 51% of the goal and I can spend the rest of my time doing stuff I like, there's actually not that much wrong with it. I guess in the the idea of results. So anyway, that's sort of my anecdotal take on performance. And of course, I was a terrible high school student. Um, but I was also so you're talking about being around people of a certain caliber, like to have a network. You had a network that was kind of a high performing network, and that sort of gave you what did that give you exactly? Did it give you a view into like a bigger world out there, or what do you think you took away from that?
That's a good question. I've never thought about it quite that way. I just thought of the fact that the level was high. So even though I was at the low, like the bottom third of that group, I still got a good education, I guess is the bottom line. And I had the tools in place to use once I found an educational environment that was better suited to the way that I learn. And I just realized I wasn't a very good passive learner. And I could see people that were good at just onboarding information and then they could recall it, on demand. And I really needed to engage in the information and talk through it and process it for it to become useful to me. And the high school that I went to was kind of classical lecture format, almost like a little university where big classes and the professor just spoke to you and you took notes and then later on had to demonstrate that you had onboarded that and learned it. And I was much better once I got to an environment where it was you and the teacher and a small number of students, and you could talk through things. That was transformative for me.
And so, what did you study in college?
In college, it was a liberal arts college, so I studied a little bit of everything, and I still really believe in that education. I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. It's sort of specialization is the key these days, but I really feel like studying psychology and studying economics and studying history and studying um, a wide variety of subjects and then learning how to express my ideas in those different areas gave me all the tools that I needed later on. Because like many people, when I was in high school and even in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do or what kind of professional career would be right for me. I had no idea. But when I found it, I found that I was actually pretty well equipped um, to advance myself through on that path.
So you finished college, you got this degree, liberal arts degree in college, which is sort of a generic degree, and then you moved to Santa Cruz. Why?
Yeah, so well, I discovered bicycle racing, and I guess more specifically European road racing when I was 13 or 14 years old, kind of by chance, and it just captured my imagination, and there was something about it that spoke to me, and it set me on this path of becoming a bike racer and then working at a bike shop. And as I went through the ranks of bike racing, I was kind of pushing up against whatever limit I was contained by at that moment. And one of the limits was the fact that I was racing against professionals, but I was a full-time student. So the promise that I made to myself is that when I graduated from university, I was going to go and try and race full time and see what I could do if I didn't have that time constraint. And at this time, which was 1990 in the US, if you wanted to make a name for yourself as a bike racer, you had to go to Colorado or California. And I knew one person in this little town of Santa Cruz, California, and I decided, well, I guess I'll go there and see what I can do. And that person had been the owner of a bike shop where I had worked, and he had just gotten into the other side of the industry and was the international sales manager for this little startup company called Giro. And I called him and said, "Hey, I want to come out to California and race my bike, but I don't have a team. I don't have any health insurance. I need a part-time job." And he said, "Well, the founder of Giro has a soft spot for bike racers. He was a bike racer, and I told him your story, and he wants to help. So he's going to get you a part-time job at this company, and he'll let you, take off to go race your bike. And if you want to come out, the plate is kind of set for you." He didn't tell me what the job was, by the way. He just said there was one for me.
You didn't care.
And on that, I packed up my car, I put my bikes on my roof rack, put some records in the trunk and some books, and drove out to Santa Cruz and started
Wow.
working as a shipping clerk. at this little company called Giro that had just emerged basically from the founder's um, home in San Jose.
And so you,
So it was just total random event.
yeah, yeah, and it's serendipity, right? I mean, it's these types of things that, get people started. A lot of the people I've spoken with, Claudio Marra from FSA, he worked, his father died and he had to go work at for Racine, at 14. He was sweeping sweeping the warehouse and started that way. So I think in cycling, this is a pretty common tale. So you go out there, and I presume that you're racing, but you're seeing this business, and you start realizing, wow, this is something that really interests me and really engages me. Was the business, right? I mean, when did you start realizing that you wanted to be part of the business?
So, I was out on the, in the warehouse. And at this time, Giro was manufacturing helmets in Santa Cruz. So there was a warehouse and there was a factory, and then there was a small office where the sales and marketing and operations people worked. And what started happening was Jim or Liz Bradley, who was the director of marketing at the time, when they were working on marketing projects or sometimes colors and graphics, they'd from time to time call me in, from the warehouse into the carpeted, you know, nerve center of the company and sort of ask my opinion about things. Hey, do you like this idea or that idea better? Or,
Because you were you were
we have this idea.
young and you
Yeah,
were
I was
out there,
21. I
yeah,
was
and
21
they
and
wanted to
no
get
mark.
they get the pulse, but they wanted to get the pulse of young people too, right? I mean, that still happens today.
Yeah, exactly. And well, they were just looking for the best ideas. I think a lot of companies have this kind of top-down approach, and the wise older people are the ones that have all the knowledge. And Giro wasn't that way at all. It was a very curious, outward-looking organization. But I remember one particular moment when they were working on an advertisement, and the concept was, you know, the headline is going to be what's inside Greg LeMond's head and what keeps it there. And it was sort of a close-up shot of LeMond wearing this air attack helmet, and they wanted to kind of show some thought bubbles about what Greg might have been thinking about. And they asked me, "Hey, what does a bike racer think about when they're out, training?" And I said, I think about at a certain point on every ride, I start thinking about what I'm going to eat when I get back home. What's in the refrigerator? What can I cook? What can I grab on the way back? And I knew that Lamont liked Mexican food, so I was thinking he probably thinks about tacos, or he thinks about what kind of burrito he's going to have when he gets back. Anyway, I sort of got into this whole creative process around advertising and messaging, and that led to more and more calls, for me to come in from the warehouse and help out on things. And I loved it. And I think they felt like I was adding something to the process. So yeah, that was sort of my window into this world of what I later understood to be called marketing or product creation. Because it started off in marketing and then it turned into, hey, what do you think of this helmet design?
Right.
And what do you think are the most important features? And would you do this or do that? And I just I just loved it.
And so you're starting to see the business at the absolute ground level, which for a lot of people is not an opportunity that you get every day, and especially a brand like Giro. So how did this relationship progress, and what was kind of your next step in the process, from going from providing insight into what it's like to be a writer, which in our business is often the lens that we have to look at everything through, to you said you started becoming more engaged in the product side of things.
Yeah, I guess just to finish this story, I held myself to my promise. So I worked at Giro for about 10 months until I found a team and was able to race full time, and I quit Giro. and I raced a season in the US, and then I raced a season in mostly in France just to see how far I could go. And I found what I believed was my my natural ceiling.
Sure.
And I wasn't even sure I was what I was going to do after that. I was thinking about, should I go to graduate school? I was typical kind of semi-lost 23-year-old. And I ended up getting a chance to come back to Giro for a temporary job in the marketing department, while Katrin Tobin, former professional bike racer, star of the kind of 80s era women's cycling, went on maternity leave. So I got to do her job on a temporary basis.
Which
And
was
she was the marketing manager. There was a marketing director and a marketing manager. She
okay.
was kind of doing a little bit of product management and a little bit of product marketing.
Okay.
So I came back from France, and I moved back to Santa Cruz and started working as a temporary marketing manager. And then when Katrin came back, they created a space for me and said, okay, now we're going to have two managers. And Katrin, being a new mother, was going to focus on the children's helmet market and recreational helmets. And then I was going to focus on what we called um, the enthusiast segments, so more the competitive high performance side. So I then became marketing manager, product manager, and really got into what it meant to create products from some core values and beliefs. And yeah, I think Giro, I have come to realize, was a very special company, um, particularly at that time, to be so small and have relatively small scale, but to be populated by just truly remarkable people in terms of what they were able to do, but also the way that they worked with others. And you know, my we'll maybe talk about Jim Collins a little bit later, who was one of the people that was involved in Giro at the early days and went on to become a very successful business author. And he talks about who luck and how important it is to surround yourself with the right people, and how so much of people's success comes down to who they who they meet. And I'm the recipient of just incredible who luck, and learn from some great people at this little company.
So who you said Jim Collins? Who is Jim Collins?
So Jim Collins is, he would probably describe himself as some kind of a social scientist, but he's become a very well-known business author. He's written some books that are on a lot of people's shelves, like Good to Great and Built to Last. And he was a Stanford University professor that kind of used business and the data that was available from publicly traded companies to try to understand what the formula was that differentiated the great companies from all the rest. And yeah, he was helping Giro really. I
Like
think
as a
he'd only
consultant?
written, yeah, well, he was just sort of an advisor. There was a connection between Giro and Stanford University that
Okay.
was quite strong. Jim Gentis, the founder of Giro, at some point was looking for someone to run the company, and someone suggested to him that Jim Collins would be the right person. So Jim Gentis offered Jim Collins the job, and Jim Collins said, I don't think I'm really cut out for that kind of work. I want to be a teacher. I want to be an author, but I know a guy, um, this man named Bill Hanneman, who was a dean of the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and he became Giro's first president. And before working at Stanford, he was running Adidas USA. So he came from a very strong sporting goods background, and knew what it meant to be part of a truly powerful brand and a great company.
And so these people, like this Jim Collins sounds like a really accomplished, teacher consultant. And like, what are some of the things you took away from your collaboration with a guy Jim Collins?
Well, I mean, what he found through his research is that the things that differentiate the great companies from all the rest are certain ways of thinking and behaving. And it's a lot about a long-term view and hiring disciplined people who think in disciplined or organized ways and then behave in accordance with those ways. So it's, as opposed to a lot of um, businesses that are very opportunistic and find themselves chasing these opportunities and maximizing those opportunities, on the upside and then surviving the bad ones. Jim Collins was all about um, really knowing why you existed as a company and what your purpose was, and using that as a North Star and organizing everything in the company around fulfilling that ambition. So it's about the leaders of these companies. He calls them level 5 leaders. The Our culture, I think, likes to celebrate these very um, super charismatic, loud, CEOs or founders. But actually, if you look at the most successful businesses over time, they tend to have humble leaders who are also very driven. It's that combination of humility and drive that he identified as what a business needs to be successful over the long term. And he talked about knowing, he calls it the hedgehog concept, which is knowing what you're passionate about, what you as a business can be best in the world at, and then knowing how you can create some sort of economic flywheel around that. Like you have to be super clear on those three things. And then once you're clear on that, you just focus year after year um, around, pursuing that path.
But that this discipline around management, it sounds like talking about a real disciplined approach to management and a disciplined approach to building a business. Doesn't this go against kind of the um, private equity or publicly traded companies concept of being, quarter to quarter or in short term blips?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I've thought a lot about. For me, focusing on the source of the funds that help you operate a business it's a little bit of a red herring. It's for me, the challenge is when the owners of a company have different goals or a different time frame for achieving goals than the core business itself. So, in the classic private equity model, they're making investments and they want to get a return on that investment in a relatively short period of time, 3 to 5 years. And if you have a management team, and not just a management team, but a business that's focused on, a 10 to 20 year horizon, you end up with a lot of conflicts between those things. And that usually ends up working out poorly for the company.
So
Um,
if I understand correctly, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but your upbringing in terms of your professional growth was built around a more long-term development of a brand and of a business and of a team. And does that mean that your specific growth, um, we'll call it pedigree, isn't very compatible with short-term goals?
yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And I would just say that to the extent I had some success or have had some success in my career, it was really by trying to adhere to these core values and beliefs that I was exposed to and learned about and watched drive success in my earliest days at Giro. So Giro was still owned by the founder when I joined the company, and he sold it to what was a publicly traded company called Bell Sports in 1996.
Okay.
And then a
What
couple
was the
years after,
founder's name?
Jim Gentis,
Jim Gentis.
Gentes.
Okay. And did he sell all of his shares or part of his
Yes,
shares? All of them. Okay. And was
yeah.
in 6 years, like, he just was, why? Why did he sell them?
Well, he founded the company in 1985,
Ah, okay.
and he was actually an industrial designer for Blackburn, which was another brand that ended up in the same portfolio as Giro. So the little interesting confluence there. But yeah, he started the company in 85 and he held on to it until around 1996. And I
That was enough
think,
for him.
yeah, I think it was enough for him. And I think he sort of looked at Giro as one would look at a child. And he felt like he had brought it up to the point where it was now ready to go off and live its own life.
Well, it feels to me like there are certain points in a business where it's like you can either be a jewel or you can scale. And maybe Jim was like, if I can't scale this thing, I don't want to go into more debt, and for it to be a bigger, a worldwide brand, like you have to invest in in manufacturing and stock and things, and perhaps like an individual has a hard time doing that. So it makes sense oftentimes to grow, to bring on investors, or to outright sell. So it sounds like that was the conclusion that he came to as well.
Yeah, I think so. And what he wanted for Giro was for it to be a brand that made products that had a real impact on the world. So scale in many ways was important for him.
Sure.
Not because of putting more money in the bank, but just having more of an impact. And I think that he saw an opportunity with a bigger, um, more powerful sort of owner for the brand to have more impact.
Yeah, have a higher
And
ceiling. And I think Cervello is a similar case as well with
yeah,
Gerard and his partner. I spoke with Gerard,
yeah, I listened
uh,
to that one.
and I think it was similar. He was like, "Look, like I keep putting my money in, and it keeps going, and nothing comes out because to scale you have to." And I've seen this before where it's like to scale you have to put more in. So everything that was coming out was going back in to scale. So it was like sort of a zero sum game for him, which is totally fair, to say, hey, look, I mean, at some point I do have to have some return here, and probably investors too. So the brand went to Bell, and you stayed on.
Yeah, I stayed on, and as is often the case, there's a bit of a leadership transition that occurs after these transactions, and it turned out that I was offered the chance to be the director of marketing at Giro when I think I was 26 or 27 at the time, so relatively young and new in my career, but I got the chance to have this job that I never thought I'd have the chance to have. I thought I'd need to go back and get an MBA. I thought all these things would have to happen before I could get a job like that. And in fact, I was given that opportunity, and again ended up in a really good environment with other really strong leaders that had a long-term approach and valued brands and wanted to be, you know, brands and make products that influence the world in a positive way. It was another case of who luck for me.
In a sense that you had leaders around you from Bell as well that were positive influences on your professional trajectory.
Yeah, for sure. And to name one in particular, that there were more than one, but the CEO of this group called Bell Sports at the time is someone named Terry Lee, who is truly a mentor of mine and someone that I continued working for up until the end of my career at Bell Giro Vista Outdoor. So yeah, he was the CEO, and while he took the company public from being private or publicly held back to being private equity owned, he had such um, influence over the various private equity owners that we had, that he always created room for us to have a long-term approach and do the right thing and make those tough decisions for the long-term health of the business. So we really benefited from him navigating this middle ground between these short-term interests of private equity and the long-term ambitions that we had for these great brands. You know, Bell is truly a great brand in for sure in the category of helmets, but I think more holistically, just looking at the evolution of sports or action sports in society, and Bell was there every step of the way.
Sure.
So he valued that and felt responsible for continuing those traditions, and yeah, created this great environment for us to succeed. And we had investment resources to do so, and learned a lot of financial and business discipline by having to sort of translate what we were trying to do as these product and brand driven businesses to private equity owners who looked at the world very differently. It was, I guess, maybe I'm getting too much into the details, but it was this really interesting soup, this mix of different mindsets that for many, many years we found a good balance, um, and made the brands, I think, successful in their categories.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I guess tell us more about this trajectory because you come on as the um, marketing director in this would have been 96.
96. Yeah, that's right.
And so how long, just to give people an idea around your journey at Giro, how long were you there as that in that role? Like what were kind of the next steps in terms of like the evolution of the brand while you were there from 96 on? Like, can you give us a little more insight into, what were kind of the big steps while you were there?
Yeah, I guess a couple of stories just as context. One is that, of course, when people, if they think about Giro at all, they probably think about helmets. Jim, the founder, wasn't trying to create a helmet company. He thought of Giro as a design company. And in fact, the name of the company is Giro
Giro Sport
Sport
Design.
Design.
Yep.
And he just believed in the power of design, to amplify experiences. He loved the idea. He loved aerodynamics, before it really became a thing. He just loved the idea that if you designed a helmet in just the right way, you could put it on a rider and make him or her faster. Like the only thing that changes is just, put on this helmet as opposed to having no helmet on or a bad helmet, and you're automatically faster. Like this idea of human amplification driven by smart design and design thinking was what he was all about. So, helmets became very successful and occupied a lot of the company's time, but he was always looking for what was next. And in fact, Giro's second product was a water bottle, which may seem like an odd choice, but for Jim, he loved applying design and design thinking to underserved categories. And he was really frustrated with water bottles. And Giro invented what is now the modern water bottle with a large mouth opening and a screw top so you can put in ice cubes, or that whole thing started with Giro. And then he and the team were looking at other opportunities, other categories that we could apply this Giro mindset to. And right around the time of the transition, we were focused on bicycle saddles and felt that it was a category that was really, really important to the riding experience, but had become completely stagnant. There wasn't any innovation there.
This was
The innovate,
still around 96
yeah,
or after?
95, 96. I
Okay.
remember kind of the height of saddle innovation at this moment, um, was, I can't remember who it was, maybe Salatalia, embroidered a pirate, on the top of the saddle for Pantani, and that
Right.
was that
Yeah.
was the big story in saddles for a while, was embroidering things on there. And Jim just felt like, what, I think there's more. I think the saddle itself needs to get better. So we started a project to reinvent saddles,
And this
and
eventually became FIZIK, right?
became FIZIK.
So, and I know you guys, you had this project to, and why didn't, at the end of the day, why didn't they use, because you needed Cele Royal as a partner for for the production, and then at the end of the day, what happened? Because it sounds like you guys went through some exercises, you got a project together, but then it was sort of it was given or it was left to Stella Royal. Can you give a little more color here because this is kind of an interesting story?
Yeah, it's a great story, and one that almost deserves maybe its
Yeah,
own
probably.
podcast, because there's some real characters that were involved in the mix. But as I understand it, there was a long-term agreement between two brothers, and I know the family name is Bigoline, and I don't remember their first names, but one of the brothers owned and operated Sella Royale, and the
Yep.
other one operated Sella Italia. And they had an agreement that one would focus on the premium market, and the other would kind of focus on the lower end, OEM side of the market. And that was the truce that they had. And Sella Italia broke the truce, and then Sella Royale wanted to respond. So that's Sella Royale and Giro came together around a common desire to create a new saddle brand. And it was going to be Giro design,
Right.
but manufactured with Cell Royale's capabilities. So this was all in the works. I was the first product manager. I was doing the product briefs and working with the design team to reinvent kind of the way saddles were designed. And we came up with this product line. It was all set to go. And then Jim dropped the bomb on us that he had sold the company to Bell. And Bell said, "You know what? This saddle thing, it sounds really interesting, but we bought you to be the best
Helmets.
helmet brand in the
Right.
world. So this doesn't fit strategically with our vision." But we believed in the products so strongly that we wanted to find a way to bring them to market. And that's when we went back to Cell Royale, and they decided to create a brand that they named FIZIK around the products that we had created. And then we got to put a little badge on the side of the saddles that said designed by Giro. So what I felt we were gaining was, one, we wanted the products to come to life because we believed in it. And two, we wanted to be seen as a design company. And this was a really overt way of demonstrating that. And Cerro Royale got what they wanted, which was a way to attack the premium market. And it proceeded that way for another 3 or maybe even longer, quite a few years, where Giro was doing the industrial design and we were collaborating on the marketing. And I think the rest of the story kind of tells itself. I think FIZIK really changed the category.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Interesting,
and and to
interesting
be
deviation in the story. So this, I mean, this was a powerful, it was a powerful, way of thinking where you guys were able to kind of help bore, the physique brand, and then this whole idea of stagnation in product, because you're able to kind of jump in where there's stagnation. Um, is it sort of like the stock market where things are undervalued and overvalued, where there's too much happening? Do you see it that way?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little bit more. That's a super good question. Yeah,
Because
I think
clothing had a
there's
similar had a similar thing happen with Rafa.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think there's always cycles to these categories, and it goes through phases where there's a lot of innovation, and then there's a growth curve associated with that, and then things plateau. And sometimes they plateau forever, or sometimes they decline after the plateau, or sometimes there's some new idea
Right.
a disruptive idea or
For sure.
brand that creates a whole nother like little growth curve.
And what's crazy is
And
product
that's
product is global. Everything is a product. Like everything that we do, everything that we see, software is a product, and it has similar, like you're constantly looking for in terms of product, you're constantly looking for something that can serve a need. I'm butchering what product is because this is your trade, man. Maybe you can help me. But like I see it as like me as a product. This podcast is a product. It's serving a need because there's a need in the market for information about the business of cycling because there really wasn't anything out there. So I'm serving that need, hopefully in a good way. The same with saddles. FIZIK came in and said, "Look, there's stagnation in this category. Let's fill that need." I'm going to let you talk because, like, how do you see product in a holistic sense? Am I doing it any justice here?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think there's different ways of talking about this. I can talk better about how Giro came to these decisions. You know, kind of when I think about what a brand is, you know, that word brand for me is really synonymous with the business. The brand is sort of an encapsulation
The container.
of you know core values and beliefs, and then a way of expressing those beliefs through a physical product or through
An
graphic
attitude.
treatments
An
or yeah,
attitude.
yeah, all
An
that. It's all,
attitude.
like all that communication.
Uh-huh.
For me, the brands and businesses that do it best, it is all coming from very clearly defined and understood values and beliefs. And then you're looking for ways to express those values and beliefs in your own unique way. And then, you know, the marketing chips in around telling people
Yeah.
what you did and why
Relaying the
you did
message.
it.
Yep.
And then you sort of wait to see if it resonates. And, you know, if it does, that sets you off on one kind of loop. And if it doesn't, you can either abandon that idea or come back and try it again. And, you know, it's a circle. And, you know, I'm sure you know this because you speak Italian, but Giro is a word that kind of means to go round, or it's a
Yeah,
circuit. You
it
know,
means
it's a
turn.
loop. It's
Literally
a
means
turn.
turn, like gir
Yeah,
it's a verb, yeah, to turn, but giro is a turn.
yeah. So you know, that was intentional, and
Oh
you know the
wow. I
design
didn't know that.
process
I didn't know that.
is
Circular with
is a
feedback.
loop if it's
Yeah.
done right. Yeah,
Yep.
and Jim Collins again talks about how the best businesses have these flywheels, you know, which are it's a sequence of kind of self-reinforcing
Improvement.
ways of thinking and acting that if you stay on it and keep every step kind of firing, the business just gets stronger and stronger.
And
Anyway,
that's
so that was sort of what how Jiro thought of it was first, you know, what do we believe in most passionately, and you know how is our particular design process unique and special, and then how can we apply that in ways that can have a real impact on either you know people's experience or you know, in the case of helmets, like you know literally saving people's lives. You know that was sort of our way of seeing the world. And then, you know, every so often we were seeing opportunities to live those beliefs through this way of thinking and way of acting. And yeah, this sort of attraction towards categories that had stagnated was something that was there at the beginning of Giro's history, and something that I just um, onboarded and tried to keep part of the way Giro thought about itself and thought about how it defined success. So, you know, water bottles, and then saddles, uh, hydration was the next category that we didn't do it with Giro, but it was Giro's way of thinking that said, you know, there's an opportunity in hydration. You know, the Camelback, which created the category, they'd sort of stagnated, and people were wearing these like neoprene sleeves with a water bladder on the inside, and we thought they were kind of missing the opportunity, and we started focusing on the pack that held the water reservoir, and then improving the way that you filled the reservoir and the way the bite valve worked. And it was all Giro thinking, but it was applied to a brand that we created called HydroPack, which was later sold and has gone on to I think live its dream and be influential in the world of hydration. And then we got into ski helmets and created the whole category of, I'll call it recreational ski helmets, but just helmets for things other than racing or competing. And that was, those were the loops that Giro just
You just
kept
went
spinning on.
from lily pad to lily pad, it
Hmm.
feels like to me, where you're able to kind of apply your this disciplined approach to product flywheel, find the product that maybe is underserved, apply some design um, concepts around it, find where it can be improved. And is this something that you've done then most of your career after that?
Yeah, I think, at a certain point, you I think people have a way of seeing the world, and they have more clarity around, you know, what they're good at, kind of Jim Collins would say what they're encoded for. And it, there's always room to grow and evolve. And I'm also a big believer in repotting yourself every now and then just to stimulate new growth. But yeah, I'd say to some extent that's now the way that I see a successful business being run is using these same principles.
The product
You
is
know, when
a heart of the business in most
Yeah,
businesses, right? The product
yeah.
is
But
the
but even
core.
even before that is the values and beliefs that you then express through your product. So, I did take a couple of detours. I left Giro in 1999 and went to the North Face and was part of the team that introduced that brand to footwear, and that category has continued to thrive for them. So that was an opportunity for me to start from a different set of values and beliefs, and then enter a category um, using some of the same methods, but a different starting point and with different filters in place to create a business. So I did that, and more recently at Specialized, I came in with, again, my way of thinking and working, but with a completely different brand and different set of values and beliefs and starting point, and tried to make my way there as well. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, maybe it sounds boring, but that's
No,
that's
no,
it's
no,
kind of
you gotta put
I just
you gotta triple down.
I still love it, Wyatt.
You
It's
gotta
it's
triple
crazy
down. I
after
mean,
all these years. It hasn't gotten the least bit boring for me. I still love this whole process of looking out at the world and looking for ways to make things better. And
this is
then,
your trade, man.
yeah,
Like this is your
get, get,
trade. Like it's clear that it's something you're good at, and it's clear that companies and brands need this guidance. And so to have the experience that you have, I think unbelievably valuable.
yeah.
So
And just I want to take a minute to, I mean, this, you're interviewing me and it's a one-on-one interview, so I'm telling my part of the story, but um, there are so many incredibly talented people that I've had the chance to work with through the years that were equally invested in in manifesting these values and beliefs in all these different ways. So, and that's something that, as I told you earlier, I was fortunate enough to experience, is being the kid in the warehouse being brought in to consult, on marketing and product decisions. So what I've always tried to do is create similar opportunities for the people on the teams that I worked with and helped build.
I want to
So it's been a huge part of it, is all these people that have been attracted to these different um, missions and put their stamp on it. And yeah, I'm again, who luck. I've had the chance to work with so many incredible people on all these different projects.
And can you tell people that are listening, maybe like when you have been involved with these types of people, and how do you identify this type of relationship, and how do you because for people that are maybe younger or that are in the business, like these types of interactions, like what are some ways that people um, can understand like how to identify these people, and then how best to care for this type of relationship and kind of nurture it.
Yeah, it is, everyone says this, probably everyone in your podcast talks about how it really is at the end of the day about the people that you work with. Um, so, how do you find those people and attract them? For me, it's about, as a business leader, going to use that phrase, if you are able to very clearly articulate your brand's values and beliefs and your reason for being and your ways of working, you express these beliefs, what naturally happens is you attract people who believe the same things, just the way humans work. But it starts with having the clarity and the ability to speak about those values and beliefs so that the right people out there can find them and then find you. So I think Jira was always quite good at that, is being able to articulate a vision. And then when you're talking to people about a job, there's a very clear like forcing function there, a sorting mechanism that makes it obvious right away if these people you're talking to will fit into this culture and can work in these ways and share the same vision that you do. So I think Giro and other great brands were just really good at articulating that so as to attract and select the right people. And
So
then, the thousands and millions of decisions that you make along the way, if they're guided by, again, these values and beliefs that you can articulate, it makes the decision-making process a lot more disciplined and purposeful. And if you keep doing that over time, you can end up building a great company. So we sort of looked at it that way, and we didn't hire by resume or educational background or past success. It was really all around, does this person value the same things that we do, and do they want to work in the same way that we want to work? And yeah, that attracted something like the island of misfit toys. In some ways, we had a really unusual group of people at Giro in particular, but at the other brands as well, that brought these different, worldviews, but applied them in the same focused and disciplined way. And there's magic in there if you have the courage to run your company that way. I think it's easier to have this top down command and control, way of running a business, and we see that pretty often. But we always try to turn it upside down.
I want to dig more into this. Greg, can you just give me 1 minute? I'm just going to pause for a second.
Yeah, sure.
I So Greg, I have to ask. I have a lot of people that work in the business that follow this podcast, and spoken and seen a lot of situations where they're moving forward, but maybe they don't articulate their values really clearly, and their positioning is a little vague. And I mean, I can see how it's scary for business owners to want to position themselves too niche or too clearly, because then you're maybe excluding other potential customers. But
Mm.
I would like to ask you if you can do just to speak to these brands that maybe aren't as positioned as clearly as they should be, and explain maybe a little bit of how how you see this this idea around positioning, and around how the brand has to have clear values to attract the right people, because we're saying it has to attract the right people. It has to influence what products you make, what you do for your customers. Like, can you explain, and you are explaining it, but can you talk to that on the risks and rewards of doing something like that, and being more deliberate about the positioning and about the brand. Because I know that this is kind of probably the consulting that you do now, right?
Yeah, it's so fundamental, and from a little bit of distance you can look at brands and businesses and identify the ones that are clearly, they've identified their business concept, what they're passionate about, what they can be best in the world at, and then how to build a business around it. Like you can see the ones that have discovered that and now are working that plan.
Double and
And then
triple down on it.
yeah, and then you can see others that are going from opportunity to opportunity.
That's
And
how you
it's
see it, as opportunistic is the opposite of deliberate.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
so. I'm sure there's other ways of thinking about it or describing it, but
No, I want to know
again,
how you think about it.
back to early mentors that I had. I was a young guy when people first started asking me what I thought about these different things. So I was just, like I had all these ideas, and Bill Hanneman, the first president of Giro, would always stop me and say, "Is this an opportunity or is this a strategy?" And
Wow.
he would really force me to think about it and then to answer that question. Is this just an opportunity that I see, or is this clearly aligned with our values and beliefs and our purpose, and all those things I just described before, the passion, the capability, and then the business model. So it was just sort of beaten into me in some ways. And just like all things that you learn, at a certain point you internalize it,
Sure.
and you don't have to have someone else ask you the question. You start asking it of yourself. Is this an opportunity or a strategy? And how can I be really clear which one it is? And it sometimes there are opportunities that
That are
are
aligned.
big enough and aligned enough
Yeah.
that you make room for them in your strategy, but then you really have to be committed to those long term. And I've got a few examples of those that started off right and then went wrong because of that dissonance between the time frame that we were working on as a team and the time frame of investors or owners. And a lot of things end up getting stuck in the middle there. But yeah, I think that discipline and I don't know if discipline is quite the right word, but
Well, discipline in the
I'll
execution.
use it. It's more it's intention as much as it's discipline, but just being really clear on on what you do and how you do it,
Okay, but
and
what
then
if I'm
using
wrong,
that as
Greg?
a filter.
What if I'm wrong? What if there's not enough market out there for my vision?
Well, that means that your concept isn't
Profitable.
formed enough. Yeah, or
It's not a real
yeah, I
business.
think I think a lot of brands, they grow to a certain point, and and you can see them getting frustrated with that stagnation, and then they start looking for ways to grow, because the way we value businesses largely these days
Sure,
is
is revenue.
is year-over-year growth and profit growth, and that's just the the hamster wheel that we've all been put on.
Well,
But 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 but
then I
I
have to
think
ask
it's,
this, Greg.
some companies, you can see it, like they were just amazing $40 million businesses, and they could have just continued doing that and staying at that size and staying true to their values and having teams that are aligned, but they decide themselves, or they get pressure from an owner to try to get to 100 million, and then they start taking steps that aren't intentional or aren't disciplined or aren't aligned with those core values and beliefs, and you can see them start to disintegrate. And some save it before it's too late, and others enter into this doom loop, and they crash. Or again, Jim Collins, when he talks about what's the opposite of great, he says it's death or irrelevance. And that happens to a lot of brands that they're like zombie brands. They're out there and they're still alive in some ways, but they're dead on the inside and they're irrelevant. They're not really making an impact on the world. So that's the risk. And I think some people just need to recognize that the idea of their brand will only get them to a certain point. And you have to either be satisfied with reaching that point and then continuing, or you need a whole different
Brand.
set of
Yeah.
concepts that
Yep.
again build this. What am I passionate about? What can I be best at? What's a business model that I can build around this? But it's this lure of opportunities that I see as the catalyst for a lot of the problems. And again, that chase of the opportunity of the shiny object can sometimes be from within, from a team that isn't disciplined, or from a founder that's just very creative and always thinking about what's next, or it can be pressure from an ownership group. But man, that's the root of so many problems. So yeah, I'd say if things aren't working, you got to go back to those core concepts and talk through them again and be really honest with yourself about whether or not you have all those things in place. Or another mentor of mine, I brought his name up earlier, Terry Lee. He always talked about the three P's. And whenever he looked at a business, he just forced himself to think about these three P's. And when he first described this to me, I thought, this is way too simple. Like this is sort of almost absurd. But for him, the three P's were people, product, and plan. And he said, I can diagnose any business by just using that framework. Is it a people problem? Do I not have the right people to do what I'm trying to do? Is it a product problem? Am I not expressing this idea in the right way? The quality isn't right, or the price isn't correct, or there's a million ways to get the product wrong. Or is it a plan problem? Do I not have a good plan? And I have the right people and I'm doing the right product, but the plan was
That's
unrealistic.
execution. Plan is the
Yeah,
execution. Yeah.
yeah. But it's also the strategy. It's what you're executing against. But anyway, whether it's the so-called hedgehog concept that Jim Collins describes with those three things, or Terry Lee's three Ps, you got to have those frameworks in place that you can use to ask yourself and your organization the right questions, and then figure out where it's broken if it isn't working, and then ask yourself again, is it a people problem, a product, or a plan? That can send you down the right path 9 times out of 10, I find. Even as simplistic as it sounds, there's real power in zooming out to those kind of essential levels.
So these brands that you work with, or that you've worked with, or that you've had the opportunity to consult with, they have ceilings based on the total addressable market. Because what I'm trying to tease out here is we have, like, brands need to be honest with themselves about what their values are, and then those values, that's the brand. Those values that can then be expressed in products and in marketing, and through the values and through the concepts that are defined with building this brand architecture. The products are built, and then they're brought to the world, and the world will react, and they will vote with their money. And so, based on these concepts, brands have a ceiling in terms of the size that they can grow to, and that has to do with the demand for the products that they're creating, but also the way that it resonates. And so within all this, you'll work with brands, and you'll see that around this opportunity versus strategy, that you do have to make really hard decisions around, okay, we can grow, but it's like you're pulling the bed sheet. It's only so big. Like if you want to go into that area, you're going to dilute potentially the brand strategy that we're building and that we're trying to communicate, which at the end of the day is going to get us to be more trusted and more believable and more authority in the market. So those are the conversations that you have with business owners where it's like this might be all we can do with this strategy, right? Because this is what's really I'm really curious about, because I have a really good friend who is a consultant from Deloitte, and he's always talking about you're either a jewel or you're going to be scaling. And if you're in the middle, it's a dangerous place to be, right?
Yeah.
And so can you talk about that a little bit to me? Like first of all, do you agree with this concept that I just threw out there where you're either a jewel or you're scaling and you don't want to be in the middle?
Yes and no. I think that, again, using this word brands are either getting stronger or getting weaker. I
At
think
any given
it's
moment.
at any given moment
Okay.
or period of time, your brand is getting stronger or weaker. So I think the mistake, in my opinion, is thinking that financial growth is the only way of describing a brand as a jewel or a turd, or whatever you want to use as your polls. I think that's where I might disagree with someone from Deloitte who's just very focused on the financial metric. I believe a brand can be a jewel. I don't know, look at Ferrari or Rolex, a brand that isn't trying necessarily to get bigger and bigger. They're just trying to be the best version of themselves.
And they just happen
And
to be getting bigger and bigger.
yeah, that's usually what happens. That's the cool thing about this is that in a lot of cases, if you are really true to your values and beliefs and your concept for your business, uh, opportunities to grow do present themselves. But I don't think just because you've been great at designing and marketing and selling supercars means you have to
No, of
try to
course.
be the biggest brand in the world also in terms of volume. So but yeah, I think you do have to make sure that you are making progress and you are evolving because your customers are evolving and the the culture is evolving, and these are important inputs that you have to bring into your model and then run it through your own system to decide what to do next. When I say, the idea of a brand might have a cap on it financially, it doesn't mean that once they reach that cap, they don't evolve. I don't think that's true at all. They have to continue to look for ways to be that best version of themselves. It's when they stop acting in accordance with their their core values and beliefs, that's when things start to go wrong. And oftentimes you end up losing your core. Not only do you not grow or grow profitably, but you lose your core. And we could probably each come up with a list of brands that are
Yeah.
somewhere in that,
Yeah.
on that continuum. And you sort of, if it's a brand that you love, you're on the sidelines cheering for them, hoping, the pilots in the cockpit are able to pull up or get some speed before they auger in. But that happens so often. And yeah, for sure, I've augured in a few times as well. So I have great empathy for all business leaders who are trying to navigate these challenges.
Getting back to the Deloitte consultant uh, concept, it's I guess from a revenue standpoint, sure. Like you should either be a jewel that is like you're saying, that is continually growing in terms of the brand development, that is continually being strong, becoming stronger, a stronger jewel that's driving home what they do well. So that maybe not necessarily is financially measured. And then as far as scaling goes, I guess, there are limits to to the reach that brands have, in terms of total addressable market is the term that is used often, to measure that. And that's doesn't sound like that's exactly the work that you do, that kind of go, or do you do that type of work as well? Because it sounds like you're more on the branding, marketing, and positioning side. But when it comes to like this sort of like market and ceiling, I guess, is this something that you have experience with as well?
Yes, I'd say the consulting that I'm doing more and more of, and I'm not completely comfortable with that word consulting, because when I think of a consultant, it's usually
Advising, advising.
someone from the outside that comes in and they
Yeah.
have they have their recipe, and they're very good at presenting it, and they wave their arms around a lot, and drop these great slogans, and then they disappear. Like that's not what I do. I really like to go deeper. I think I'm able to help brands and businesses now that are in some kind of transition. And I think I'm with my way of seeing things and some experiences and successes and failures, I think I'm able to help uh, brands get more focused on navigating this transition. Whether it's, right now I'm working for a couple of startups, so that's a particular transition and brings with it some very specific ways of thinking and acting. But prior to my time at Specialized, I was consulting for Mips, the Swedish helmet technology ingredient brand, and they were just scaling after 15 years of trying to get the world to understand what they had done and why it was important. They finally sort of caught fire, and I was, I think, able, through some advising work and then being part of the board of directors, help frame some things up in a way that they then had a disciplined plan and that they could hire and build around and then execute and measure their success against. And I think maybe it's just that I like doing this kind of work, but that's where I find myself getting pulled into businesses now, is navigating a transition. Or I had the great opportunity to work with Santa Cruz bicycles a few years back as they were transitioning from being this challenger brand to really being the brand that was driving performance mountain bikes. And through a lot of the same things I just described, I helped them clarify some things around what their values and beliefs were and how they could articulate them as the business was growing, and they needed people to understand what the Santa Cruz way of thinking and acting was. I think I was able to help pull out of them some ways of doing that.
What are
So
you
that,
doing
that
for Specialized right now? I'm curious.
for Specialized, I'm not doing anything. But when uh, I was doing some consulting work for 2 or 3 years after I left the Vista Outdoor Group, which included Bell and Giro and Bole and Sebe and a whole bunch of brands. Uh, I did some consulting, and then I went in-house at Specialized, and I was there for a little more than 3 years, doing a number of different things through the whole COVID boom and the first part of the bust. But I haven't consulted for them since leaving.
What's it like in Specialized?
It's well, gosh, it's a challenging question for me, because for many years, I'll say this um, honestly, even though it probably sounds bad, I use Specialize as sort of a way to help define what Giro was.
Why?
And I
How? What
kind
does
of
that
I
mean?
sort of I position Specialized as the opposite of Giro in terms of its values and beliefs. And we were very focused on beating Specialized in the categories where we competed against them. So I kind of built them up, and I think many people do in the bike industry. They're a very convenient kind of big bad, the big red S kind of company. They're a foil, that you can use to position yourself in very specific ways. So I had sort of been thinking about Specialized and talking about them for a long time without honestly knowing what they were really like on the inside. I could see some of their behaviors and I could draw some conclusions based upon that, but I didn't really know what they were like as a brand until I went to work for them. And as you probably heard from many people, I remember I listened to your interview with Slade Olson, and he talks about his time there, and all the things that he described were true for me as well. It's quite a remarkable place because of the passion for bicycles that is at the core of everything there. The belief in the power of the bike to make people's lives and the world better is deeply held and the source of everything. And you have these incredibly talented people that believe those same things and are doing their part to bring those ideas to life. So I loved my time there, and also the way that the company operated didn't I wasn't really able to do what I wanted to do or to execute my vision for how to evolve the business there. And I don't have any hard feelings about that, but I felt like, okay, I've done all that I can do here, and I'm not going to change the way I think or act um, to get more traction here. It's just time for me to go a separate way. I don't know if that made sense or not, but it's a complicated company.
It sounds
I
like
want
it.
I want to focus on the positives, and that for me is again the belief in the bike and in cycling and the incredible
Positioning
people
and the
that are
positioning. They have a
there.
very
And
clear positioning.
yeah, when they get it right, the marketing, it tells its own story. They're very much often described as a great marketing company, but in some ways they don't do a lot of what other people would describe as marketing. They just express their values again around the belief in the bike and a passion for increasing performance, and they just do what they do, and the story tells itself, and they get credit for being a great marketing company, but it's really their there's a hot core there that thankfully has stayed pretty hot for most of its time.
Which is very in line with your values around how to manage brand as well. Similarly,
Yeah, that's true. I'll say that the place where that ultimately kind of pushed me out was this is my view. It is very much a business that is driven by opportunistic thinking and behaving. And that's just how Mike is.
sure, it's a choice.
He's just sort of a force of nature. Again,
Yeah,
his starting place is very aligned with my starting place, but his way of trying to organize a company around those beliefs is just different. And he asked me to come in and help him work in some different ways, but ultimately he works in his way, and you can't argue with the results.
sure.
So
No, no, these results speak for themselves. That's what I was going to say.
yeah, I mean, I still think Specialized could be an even more successful version of itself if it did act in some different ways. But again, that's the brand. It's like all of us people, we have our flaws, and it's hard to get away from them.
I almost feel like sitting down, like I would love to just sit down with you with like some popcorn and just say, okay, here's a brand, bring up a brand and just start talking about the brand, what they do, what they don't do. That would be quite the journey because it really the way that you see brand and product is incredibly interesting. And um, I really appreciate you coming on. I'd love to go into more around Giro and kind of the journey that you had there and some of your other work. But today I want to be respectful of your time. So today I think we should, I'm going to respect the time that we had agreed upon. So, is there any, if people want to get in touch with you, I know that we have a lot of people in the business, and if they want to get in touch with you, where's a good place to do that, or how can they do that?
Yeah, great question. I've largely withdrawn from social media,
Okay.
so I'm not going to give you an Instagram handle or anything like that. I'd say I'm not a super active poster, but you can connect with me through LinkedIn, just with my name, Greg Shapleigh, Shapleigh. Um, but yeah, I'm not too hard to find. I am living in this little surf town in the southwest of France, but I try to stay connected and
Sounds amazing.
love meeting people and um, exchanging ideas. So I sincerely appreciate the invitation to come on your podcast. I've enjoyed the episodes that I've um, listened to, and appreciate the great questions and
Yeah,
the
this was a lot.
curiosity. Maybe that's a word that is really fundamental to the way that I try to approach the world is being curious. Um, so I appreciate your curiosity and what that pulls out of your guests and helps all of us listeners on the other side. So appreciate the chance.
Yeah, man, this was amazing, and can't wait to hopefully we can see each other in person very soon.
All sounds good. Thank you so much, Wyatt.